Well, hey, you guys. Time to do another Tomes of Terror book review. So, T. Kingfisher. She is a horror and fantasy writer, and actually, T. Kingfisher is a pen name. When she does children's books and things like that, she goes under Ursula Vernon. But I think T. Kingfisher is what she writes like fantasy and horror under. I'd actually read one of her horror novels before, which is called The Hollow Places from 2020, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. So we had a friend listener who recommended one of her newest books to me. So I thought, well, I really liked her other one, so I'm going to give this one a whirl too. So I actually ended up buying the hard copy of this book. So this is it, and it's called A House with Good Bones, and this came out in 2023. So this book is actually described as sort of like a southern Gothic haunted housey kind of book, and that's right up my alley. So you know what I mean. That's why I bought it. Now, overall, I think I loved this just as much as The Hollow Places. I did have some slight issues with the pacing, which I'll get into a little bit later, but in the case of this book, I mean, I adored the characters, particularly the main character, the protagonist, and I really dug the whole concept of it and this kind of like slow buildup of this just really weird, I don't know, just like the buildup of it is so weird and you're just like, what the fuck is going on? You know what I mean? And it just kind of like sucked me in and just really kept me like obsessively, turning the pages and going on with it. I thought the climax seemed a little bit rushed and got resolved a little bit too easily, but overall this was like really, really entertaining and I had a really, really good time reading it. So the main character and the person whose perspective we see the entire story through is actually an archaeological entomologist named Samantha Montgomery. And she is a delightful character. She's very skeptical, she's very sarcastic, and she doesn't really have either patience or talent for social interaction, which I related to pretty hard. So yeah, she seems like very happily single. She's very passionate about her work with insects. And so like as the story goes on, because it's kind of from her perspective, like you get her thought processes and she has like all these little sly asides and comments that she makes on things. And I mean, they just had me like busting out laughing in places. I think if Samantha was a real person, I think I would definitely want to hang out with her because she's like awkward and awesome and she's also like funny as shit. I mean, seriously, I laughed my ass off at some of the shit that she said in this. So at the beginning of the story, Samantha has actually been furloughed from the archaeological dig that she'd been working on. And that's because like a Native American burial ground, they accidentally uncovered it. And, you have to go through all the legalities and stuff to figure out, where they want the bodies like returned to and stuff like that. The situation as a whole doesn't have anything to do with the main story, but it's just kind of like a reason for her to be out of work for an extended period of time. Now her supervisor has actually given her some kind of remote busy work that needs to get done to kind of keep her financially afloat until the dig can continue, obviously. So Samantha decides, because she can work remotely, she's like, oh, I'm going to have all this time off. I'm not really sure how long it's going to be. So I'm going to go back to my childhood home in South Carolina to stay with my mom. I think she was in, I want to say she was New Mexico or Arizona or somewhere like that, like where she lived. But she's going back to South Carolina to like stay with her mom. So her reasons for doing this are kind of twofold. Like, so Samantha and her mom, like, have always been close, and it's, like, been a while since she's visited her. But kind of the main reason is that she has an older brother named Brad. And Brad has called her and told her, it's like, look, I'm really kind of worried about mom. It's like, last time I was there, she seemed a little bit off. Like, not like she was. He's not entirely sure what's going on with her, but he thought she was acting like pretty weird last time he was there, and he wants Samantha to like stay with her for a while and see if she can figure out what's going on. So they're kind of hoping that her behavior isn't maybe like an indicator of early onset dementia, but that's kind of where their heads are going. So they're like, you really need to stay with her for an extended period of time and see if you can figure out if that's what it is, or if it's not that, what exactly her deal is, you know what I mean? So Samantha gets to this house where she grew up, and it's kind of in this kind of bland, middle class, very cookie cutter suburb that actually has absolutely nothing to distinguish it from any other similar neighborhood. It's like totally boring, totally uninteresting. All the houses look the same and they're all, just kind of little perfect middle class neighborhoods, you know what I mean? Now, this house previously belonged to Samantha's grandmother, who is called Grand May, and she died 20 years ago. Now, Samantha, Brad, and their mom were actually forced to move in with Grand May, like, back in the day. I can't remember if their dad, like, left or died or something like that. But, so their mom was a single mom, and they had to move in with the grandmother. And neither Brad nor Samantha, when they were kids, were real big fans of Grand May. She was very old school Southern, and had this kind of idea, like this kind of like very strict 50s Leave It to Beaver kind of standards about what a family should be. And if you didn't live up to those standards, then she was real crotchety about it, like, and she was very, very strict, like I said. She wasn't physically abusive, really, it seemed like, but she for sure, like, caused some emotional trauma in both kids that they're still very much dealing with as adults, even though it's been 20 years. So when Samantha gets to the house, she starts to notice what her brother was talking about pretty much right away. Like, Mom sort of seems like her normal self sometimes, like, occasionally. But Samantha also notices that the house has been redecorated closer to the way it was when Grand May was still alive, which is kind of disquieting because Samantha's mom, like, always had these sort of, like, funky, like, more eclectic kind of tastes. Like, she'd had, like, brightly colored walls and, like, cool artwork and everything like that. But now the house, like, the walls are just these kind of, like, boring, like, off-white kind of colors. Everything's just very, just very boring and beige and ugly. And worst of all, the thing that's most alarming, Mom has reinstalled this kind of racist painting of, like, a Confederate wedding, like, over the fireplace. Now, Grand May loved this painting, but Mom always hated it, so there it is. Like, they're wondering why. Because, like, after Grand May died, like, Mom put, like, a much cooler, like, piece of artwork, like, a scientific... I think it was kind of like a, I can't remember, it was almost like an archaeological kind of thing that was, like, really cool. But yeah, so she's put this Confederate wedding back up there. So Samantha's like, why the fuck did you put that? I thought you hated that painting. And Mom just kind of like, oh, well, Grand May loved it, and and she kind of, like, deflects the question a little bit, right? Samantha also notices that Mom seems kind of, like, nervous. Anytime that Samantha brings up Grand May, it seems like before this, Mom kind of acknowledged, like, how shitty her mom was, like the grandmother was. But now she seems to be taking great pains to defend the old bat, like, even though Grand May has been dead for 20 years and can evidently, like, no longer hear what she's saying. So it's like, why is she, oh, it's fine, she wasn't that bad, and she never did that, and Stephen Smith's like, she absolutely did do that. What are you talking about? So this is, like, really, really weird, right? So there are a couple of other things going on, too. For example, Grand May, when she was alive, was always known for her gorgeous rose garden, like, outside the house. And this rose garden still looks completely fabulous and perfect outside of the house, even though Mom insists that she does not touch it. She doesn't maintain it. She's like, I never had a green thumb. You guys know that. It just looks like that naturally, which, that seems a little sus. Samantha also notes, to her dismay, that there are absolutely no insects in the rose garden either. Now, she's an entomologist, so she knows that this is completely unnatural, and she can't figure out what the fuck is going on with that. There's also the small matter of vultures constantly sitting around the property, and they seem to be watching the house. So they have this neighbor lady who lives on the same street. Her name is Gail. And she had something, she's like an older lady, and she had a little bit of a rivalry, like, going on with Grand May back in the old days, like, especially, like, about their gardens and stuff, which seemed to be mostly what it was. But she kind of cryptically tells Samantha that the vultures are keeping an eye on the house, which, again, seems a little bit weird. So as the days go on, like, even more bizarre events, like, start to ramp up. Like, the house is besieged by a swarm of ladybugs, for example. There's kind of some minor poltergeist type activity, like, pictures falling off the walls, like, en masse and things like that. And also Samantha thinks that she feels like an unseen something or other, like combing its fingers through her hair, like while she's sleeping. Samantha also notices this very alarming detail that she never noticed before in this old framed photograph of her, like from her high school graduation. Like, they took a picture of her in her cap and gown, like out in the rose garden. And it almost looks like there's like a child's little pale hand, like coming out of the dirt in the rose garden, like by her ankle. And nobody ever noticed that before, but she notices it this time and she's like, what the fuck? So for the first 3/4 of the book or so, like little events like this keep occurring, and this really goes a long way toward like contributing to this mystery of like exactly what's going on. Now, it's pretty clear that it has something to do with Grand May, but for a long time, you're not entirely certain what the deal is. It seems more complex than like a simple haunting. And because you're asking yourself, well, why would Grand May suddenly start haunting the place after being dead for 2 decades? Like, nobody's noticed her ghost like wandering around prior to now, so why now? You know what I mean? And I will say that the explanation for the events is far weirder than it first appears. But here's kind of where the issues that I said I had with the pacing like come into play. Now, I love the idea of the story. Like the whole concept of the story is great, but I kind of felt like the buildup was so good that by the time everything just goes balls to the wall batshit at the end, it seemed like it all got sorted out like a little bit too quickly. Like the story seemed a little bit lopsided to me. Like it's going along at this kind of like very steadily ratcheting kind of pace, like laying out like all these little mysterious details, and you're like, oh my god, that's weird, what the fuck is going on with this, like with the hand and the roses and the bugs and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, and you're not really sure what's happening. But then like right at the 3/4 mark or thereabout, like this really out there thing happens. And then after that, it seems like it kind of comes out of left field a little bit, because it's like it's such an escalation from what had happened before, I guess is what I mean. And then from that point, it just, like I said, goes balls to the wall. And it all seemed to like happen and get sorted out just too quickly and like too easily a little bit. Like, don't get me wrong, like the imagery in the is really creepy and really outstanding. The concept is great, but I think I would have liked the whole climax of it like fleshed out a little bit more, and also like the mythology behind the concept, like the explanation of it, to kind of have been built out a little bit more. Like I said, so I think the last quarter of it, like the final act, I would have liked that to have been a little bit longer. You know what I'm saying? Because it just seemed like it got sorted out too quick. But that said, though, like don't take that as too much of a negative criticism, because I actually really did love this book. I had a great fucking time with it, and I would actually like unreservedly recommend it to anybody who liked any of T. Kingfisher's other stuff, and anybody who loves a good Southern Gothic, because this isn't a classic Southern Gothic, but it does have a lot of aspects of that. You know, the idea of it behind it is like really cool, really original, like really good. And the characters are I really like the character, particularly the main character, but like some of the other characters are great too. They're very compelling, and they actually seem like real people, you know what I mean? And I'm gonna say too that like some of the scenes and some of the imagery in it is like legit unsettling. So there's that too. As I said, I would have liked more expansion of the third act, because it just seemed like it happened too quick, because the first 3/4 was so good, like such a slow build up. But as a whole, I really, really like this a lot. And, you know, this is the second book of hers that I've read, and I've really enjoyed both of them. So I'll definitely be reading more of her stuff in the future, that's for sure. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.